If you spend enough time digging through old field logs, battlefield reports, and veterans' letters from the Western Front, you eventually stumble across the same quiet detail that somehow escaped official manuals. Seasoned trench fighters kept a tool that wasn't standard issue, wasn't approved, and in some cases wasn't even allowed. Yet it shows up in private photographs, confiscation notes, and in the hands of the men who survived the heaviest rotations. Historians rarely talk about it, museums rarely display it, and official quartermaster documents pretend it didn't exist. But the frontline soldiers knew what worked, and they knew what kept them alive in trenches soaked with mud, wire, and chaos. Before we go further, remember to subscribe to The Prepper Historian, because this channel is where fieldcraft, forgotten history, and real survival knowledge actually mean something. Now, let's get into the lost tool the soldiers hid from their own commanders. The first thing to understand is that trench warfare chewed through standard equipment at an unbelievable rate. Entrenching shovels bent, bayonets snapped, and wooden rifle stocks cracked in the freezing mud. Soldiers learned quickly that if they waited for official replacements or stuck strictly to what command authorized, they would be at a disadvantage. So many of them created or modified a multi-use trench tool that blended shovel, hatchet, pry bar, and striking weapon into one compact form. It looked crude, it looked improvised. But in the hands of someone who understood trench conditions, it worked far better than the cumbersome folding tools armies issued later. In many private accounts, soldiers mention filing down their entrenching tool edges, shortening the handles, reinforcing the joints with wire, or adding metal collars so it could withstand heavy blows. This wasn't for style. These men understood that in a narrow trench, a long rifle was awkward, a bayonet was too slow, and fumbling with multiple bits of gear was dangerous. A single, rugged, always-ready tool made more sense. They hid it because commanders worried such modifications suggested soldiers were preparing for close-quarter fighting. They were officially discouraged from engaging in unless ordered. The modified trench tool wasn't just about close combat. It mattered for day-to-day survival, especially during long stretches when positions shifted, collapsed, or needed reinforcing under fire. Soldiers used these tools to carve firing steps when the engineers were too slow, dig sump pits to drain water before trench foot set in, chop through frozen earth when standard shovels shattered, and break open ration boxes without dulling their knives. In the worst winter months, men used them to chip ice from their rifles or pry open crates of coal. There's a reason so many of these improvised tools were found long after the war in dugouts and collapsed tunnels. Soldiers relied on them constantly, often more than their rifles. In first-hand accounts from the Somme, some surviving veterans said the tool in their belt mattered more than half the clutter in their issued kit. It allowed them to move faster, repair faster, and defend themselves faster in conditions where, honestly, seconds mattered. Now, let's address the reason this tool remained unofficial. Standard doctrine in the First World War emphasized distance rifles, machine guns, artillery. Close-quarter engagements were considered failures of planning, but trench raids, night infiltrations, and sudden break-ins happened constantly. Soldiers needed something compact, brutal, and reliable. Command often confiscated sharpened or altered tools because they blurred the line between engineering equipment and prohibited melee weapons. But those frontline fighters knew better. A rifle with a fixed bayonet was simply too long to swing in a fire bay barely 2 feet wide. A knife could get stuck. Grenades were loud and frankly dangerous to your own side. But a sharpened, shortened trench tool was quick, silent, and devastating. Many veterans admitted decades later that the modified tool saved their lives during raids where a single clean strike decided who walked out alive. They didn't brag about it. They simply stated it as fact. The way an experienced outdoorsman explains a solution you didn't know you needed until the problem hits you in the face. For serious historians and, well, prepper-minded thinkers, the lesson is pretty straightforward. Field conditions, they dictate what actually works, not just official doctrine. If the environment destroys your standard tools, you simply have to adapt. If your survival depends on versatility, you really do need to streamline. The value of a multi-purpose tool becomes quite obvious the moment resources start to thin out. To apply this today, just consider how a single sturdy implement can serve, multiple roles in a crisis. You can test this by taking a modern entrenching tool and gradually modifying it in stages, just as World War I troops did. First, tighten or reinforce the joint. Then, practice chopping small branches, digging in frozen ground, prying open containers, and clearing debris. After enough use, you will come to recognize why soldiers simply refused to give up their homemade versions. You can also, evaluate your own field kit by asking one question the Western Front veterans would recognize immediately. If everything went to hell in the next 10 seconds, what tool would I want in my hand? The lost trench tool isn't just a piece of metal. It actually represents the mindset of men who understood their reality better than the planners behind them. It shows initiative, problem-solving, and, the instinct to adapt equipment to meet the demands of brutal, unpredictable environments. Historians often get lost in grand strategies, but the frontline truth is that survival frequently depended on small, improvised decisions at the individual level. When you break down battlefield archaeology today, many of the most personal artifacts are these modified tools. They weren't ornamental, they weren't ceremonial, they were trusted. That alone, honestly, tells us more about trench life than half the sanitized reports ever written. If you appreciate deep dives like this and want more hard, practical, historically grounded knowledge, make sure you subscribe to The Prepper Historian and share this guide with someone who respects real field history. The more we uncover, the better we understand not just how soldiers fought, but how they endured.